The Curious Realm podcast is your source for the latest and greatest news and events in the world of the paranormal, esoteric, and forbidden knowledge. And there's no better way to spark the conversation than with items from the Curious Realm store. Choose from fan favorites like hoodies, mouse pads, coffee mugs, and more. Buy books and items from your favorite Curious Realm guests. Get your hands on the latest gear for paranormal investigations and experiments we discuss on the show. Open your web browser and stop on by the Curious Realm store at curiousrealm.com/store to buy the latest Curious Realm wear and out-of-this-world gifts for yourself, your family, or a mind that you want to open. That website again is curiousrealm.com/store. Hello, everybody, and welcome back from that commercial break. Thank you so much to all of our sponsors, especially WebWorks Wireless. WebWorks Wireless is your source for high-speed internet for all. If you have a camp, remote location, if you're a podcaster like me or somebody that goes out and does live streaming on site, stop on by and check them out. Their solutions for mobile web are absolutely amazing. No data limits, no throttling, no credit checks, no contracts. WebWorks Wireless is your home for wireless internet for all. I'm here to tell you, Curious Realm has been using WebWorks Wireless since day one. Our live stream on our website has been coming through them. Never a hiccup, never an issue. Anytime that we have done live streaming on site, we have used that, and I have benchmarked it across the country from Denver, Colorado to Portland, Maine. Everywhere. It is anywhere you have cell phone signals. So if you have a camp, anything like that, kids drive you crazy because they can't get on the internet, feel free to call WebWorks Wireless. They'll help you out. Our guest in this segment is the amazing Dr. Angela Thompson Smith. She is the author of Tactical Remote Viewing, Voices from the Cosmos, as well as a whole series of other books. She is one of the leading voices in the world of remote viewing and also an experiencer. We will be getting into both of these topics today. Welcome back to the show, Dr. Smith. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. Thanks for having me on your show.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to come back on the show. The couple times that I have chatted with you have been on location. They've always been a great conversation, and I have loved kind of getting into a little bit more of the meat of your work and your history. Everything that I had read from you was, tactical remote viewing, things like that. And I had purchased the autographed copy of Voices to the Cosmos, which I just recently read on an airline trip. And that's when I found out that you had had numerous other experiences along the way before you even came to the world of remote viewing. So
right.
Let's before we get, I guess, into these other experiences, let's get into remote viewing. And how is it that you came to the world of remote viewing and this literal amazing science/mental martial art?
Yeah, I kind of slid in sideways to remote viewing because I'd had out-of-body experiences since I was a child. Didn't know what they were until my late 20s, early 30s, when I started reading books about it and attending some evening groups, and discovered that what I had been doing, there was actually a name for. I thought it was just me being weird, and able to go off in my mind to a location and wander around and visit, and sometimes get confirmation of where I'd been. And, my mother always said, "Oh, you've got a good imagination." But I had found several groups, first in Manchester, England, where I was doing my master's degree. Then I came over to the States, and I found, when I was working in New Brunswick, New Jersey, a group at Princeton Junction, not the PEAR lab, the Princeton Engineering Lab at the university, but this other small lab that was run by the McDonnell Foundation, of McDonnell Douglas fame, called the Psychophysical Research Laboratories. And they were doing some research. They'd advertised in that old magazine called Omni. I don't know if you remember it.
I dearly miss Omni magazine.
I miss it too. I really love that magazine. But there was a blurb in there, a small section by Dr. Charles Honorton. And they were looking for subjects who'd had interesting experiences. And I thought, you know what, I think I'd like to try that. So I went down and passed all their tests and, some computer stuff and an interview with them, and told them about my OBEs and some other forays I'd been into. And they said, sure. And they were doing something called the Ganzfeld. I don't know if you've heard of that.
Yes.
Where they put somebody in a restricted environment. I called it the meat locker, because you're in there with a big, heavy door. You're sat in a recliner with little ping pong balls on your eyes to shut out any visual input. Headphones on your ears to shut out any auditory input, so that you're not led into hearing anything or seeing anything. And what you have to do is what you're called the subject or viewer, and you have to try and describe what another person, another shielded room, is either watching on a TV screen, a video, or a picture in an envelope. And you just verbalize everything that's going through your mind. And so I was doing this describing, and then they show you a series of small pictures that come up on a screen, and you have to say which of those pictures most describe what you were talking about during your what they call mentation. And I picked out this picture of a woman with a space scene behind her with her hair on end. And I said, that picture, I think it was picture number 3, matches a lot of what I was perceiving. And it turned out to be a first place hit.
Wow.
Yeah. So I went down, whenever I could, on my days off and the weekends, sometimes holidays, and just enjoyed going down, exploring not only what they were offering, but my own experiences, talking with them and saying, I've had these experiences all my life. And they actually were able to show me scientific papers and other things, and particularly remote viewing. And they told me about the Princeton Engineering Anomalies Research Lab that was doing research into precognitive remote perception at Princeton University. And I was astounded because I'd always thought Princeton was very laid back, but not that laid back. Yeah. So eventually PRL, the Psychophysical Research Laboratories, closed down. They ran out of funding, and they recommended I go over to PEAR and the Princeton Engineering Anomalies Research Lab. And I ended up getting a job there and spending 5 years there working with the team there.
And exactly in what way were you working with the team? Were you one of the psychometric subjects, or more of a lab assistant?
Bit of everything. We did all participate as lab rats and in the remote perception work, and which is similar, very, very similar to remote viewing, and also the human human-computer interaction work, PK work, psychokinesis, trying to affect the output of an electronic device, a whole bunch of stuff. It was fascinating.
And the one thing I say regularly on this show and on others whenever I'm on them, Angela, is that of all the psychometric studies out there, of all the parapsychological studies out there are more people with commas and letters behind their name in the field of remote viewing than anywhere else. Laser physicists, astrophysicists, like it is phenomenal to sit back and look at that, and to also see the volume of data that has been lab gathered for not just controlled remote viewing, but for various other forms of remote viewing as well.
Right. There's a lot of research. When the skeptics say, oh, there's not a shred of evidence, they haven't, they haven't done their homework.
Yeah. Yeah. And even whenever I explain to people, and I was telling you before we started recording, I've started taking remote viewing classes through Lynn Buchanan. We've become friends over the last few conferences, things like that. And it's very interesting to me because I've studied meditation. I studied prayer, things like that for a long time. Those things take a silencing of so many other parts of you, Angela. And you would think that that's a part of remote viewing, when actually it's almost like letting those things not necessarily run wild and unchecked, but run through a checked path, you know?
Yeah. It's getting in the zone and then following the protocol. Yeah.
And you know, it's interesting because yes, there are forms of remote view. I myself am just doing controlled remote viewing, very much the protocoled remote viewing. But when you start getting into associative remote viewing, things like that, you are verging on what many would consider clairvoyance.
Right. Trying to perceive the future. Yeah. And as you say, there are many different methods. There's what Ingo Swann called spontaneous remote viewing or general remote viewing, associative, coordinate. And of course, there are all the new schools that are coming up who've adapted the old protocols slightly, but they're still getting amazing results.
Yeah. And it is really interesting to see how these communities come together and how the research comes together, how they share that data, and how everything is really chronicled in that way. Now, with your own work in remote viewing, how do you normally handle a session, Angela?
It depends on the method. If it's an ERV, which we call extended remote viewing, which is just sitting down, closing your eyes, getting a sheet of paper, drawing and writing down what you're perceiving, you start usually with a letter and number sequence, which is like the address of the target. I think of it as GPS for the soul. And you send your mind with the more unstructured protocol to the target, a little bit like, going out of body. And then just writing down whatever information comes in. I like to travel around a location when I'm out of body, or bilocating, as some people call it. It depends. With the CRV, it's very, very structured. It's a structured, written and spoken protocol.
Yes.
And it has distinct stages that lead you from one area of interest to another. So it all depends which protocol I'm doing. I like CRV, or the controlled remote viewing, where you're very, very structured. If I'm just going into it completely cold, and I have no idea what I'm doing, because we usually have no upfront or information or front loading. I may get front loading, such as the target is an isolated location. And that's all I get.
Yeah.
Or the target is an individual, described individual.
Yeah, yeah. Or as I said to you earlier, mine was my first front loading was you're viewing an event.
Yeah, yeah. And that's it. And then you just have to go in and grab the data. And it's the whole point of the protocols are to cut out what we call mental noise, which is the chatter that goes on in our heads. Yeah. Imagination, deduction. Oh, I think it might be this. I think it might be that.
Yeah, assumption.
Stick with the data.
And you know that it's interesting that you say that, because that has been a continuance of instruction from my monitor is, okay, set that aside. Don't think of it that way. Think of your gestalts. Go back to your gestalts. Is it energy? Is it motion? You know, go back to the raw of what it is. And I used to do the same thing in psychology. Whenever I went out and did observations, my professor would tell me the same thing. Stop anthropomorphizing, Chris. Stop explaining why the gorilla picked up the rock, and just write down that he picked up a rock and what time it is and how long he held it. That's all we want. Yeah. That's all we want. because otherwise you start coloring the data. And I think that is where, you know, especially when it comes to controlled remote viewing, it's been great in side conversations I've had recently to be able to kind of pull this apart for some people and explain to them that, well, you know, controlled remote viewing, or even coordinate remote viewing, like what they practiced in the military, is different than associative remote viewing, which is what you're talking about, you know, in their situation.
Associative is a whole other ball game.
Well, and that's just it. You know, they're talking much more about clairvoyance, things like that. And it's like, you know, there's some of that in there, but it's not necessarily that, you know. And it's interesting once you start studying it to see the differences in those.
Right,
and the very subtle differences sometimes.
There are subtle differences, but basically with associative, you're trying to look at a future outcome or future outcomes using a certain protocol. And whereas with just straight remote viewing, you could be anywhere, past, present, or future. Looking for data.
Now, especially in a few communities, Angela, I have seen people remote viewing past events, that may or may not have happened, you know, things like purported Bigfoot attacks.
Yeah.
Things like that. And, you know, I don't necessarily know where that comes down, but I do know numerous people and remote viewers that have stumbled upon or happened upon alien during their remote viewing sessions.
Yeah. What people tend to forget is that remote viewing doesn't give you 100% information, or, you know, it gives you supplemental information to supplement what's already known. For example, if it's a murder case, the police already have a certain amount of information, but they want more information. So you go in with remote viewing and you may be able to give them the smoking gun, you know, that piece of information that says, now we can go along this path and see what happens.
Sure. And that's even part of the job of a good monitor, is to kind of milk that information out of somebody without leading them.
Right. And that's a skill in itself.
Yeah.
I do a lot of my work solo because I've learned how to do that. And I know a lot of remote viewers do solo work. But with a monitor, I worked a target recently, which I can't talk about, but I was so happy to have a monitor sitting in front of me, because there are times in the session where I was sort of running dry, and I said, I need a movement exercise, or I need where do I go from here? And they would say, okay, you said such and such, describe that in great detail, in more detail.
Yeah.
And then I was off again.
Yeah.
Getting information.
Yeah. And I mean, despite the fact that you're writing it down, things like that, you can lose that connectivity. You can lose that emotion, because you're supposed to lose that connectivity and lose that emotion.
Yeah, you're cutting out mental noise.
Yeah, yeah. So it's
staying on what we call the signal line.
And that's just it. It can be hard to refer back to something that you're supposed to have just let pass.
Mm-hmm.
You know.
But if you have a monitor, they can point you back and say, "At this point, you said this. You mentioned this. I want to know more about that."
Well, and to be a monitor, real quick. In my previous interviews with you, and even today, you mentioned that you had numerous out-of-body experiences when you were younger. And that later you would find that this was very akin to what you would come to know as remote viewing. Now,
right. Yeah. Part of, because in the current remote viewing paradigm, let's put it that way, bilocating or going out of body is not always encouraged. The idea is that you get into a protocol where you can access information coming up from your subconscious, not necessarily going out to the target. Whereas I can do that if I, within the protocol, and I do a lot of my work solo, so I have a lot of leeway to do that. Well,
and with that being said, you also are the author of Diary of an Abduction. At what point in your life did you realize that you had been the victim of an abduction, and that you had spent time aboard craft with other beings?
Well, I have to go back a long way to when I was 16. My brother was 13. We just moved from Bristol in England down to the south of England, a little town called Wimborne in Dorset. And it was all new. This was the spring of, let's see. I'm trying to think here.
It's okay. Take your time.
Well, I'm giving away my age. Anyway, I was 16, my brother was 13, and we had separate bedrooms. And when we were put to bed or sent to bed, we would talk, and talk about our day. And then one night, it was maybe around 10-ish, our rooms were lit up with this incredible bright light. So bright that it was, I didn't know what it was. I went under the blankets and the light was coming through the blanket. And my brother, I said to my brother Alan, what is that? Is there like somebody out there with their headlights on or something? But behind us was a stream and a meadow. There was no road behind us. There was a rail line, but that was about a quarter of a mile away. And we sometimes heard the trains, but we never saw any lights from them. So he went up into his bedroom window, climbed up there and looked out. He said, there's I forget if he said a UFO or a spaceship or, it was so long ago. And I said, what? And I was scared. And he said, yeah, there's little beings coming out, walking around in the meadow. And so I was terrified. I was under the blanket because I didn't want to see or hear anything about it. But my brother is a very open, and he was a kid that was just into everything. And So he reported back to me a little bit about what was happening. And then all of a sudden, boom, the light was gone. And just nothing, just dark again. So we talked about it a little bit, and we talked after that about it other times as well. And that seemed to be it. But after that event, I started having flashback memories to things before that event. And then as I grew up, there were events that came back in flashback memories about, well, when did I do that? I don't have a working memory of doing that particular thing, but I'm having these flashback memories. And I just had to set everything aside. I went and did my nursing training at 18, went off into, professional work, and I had to set all that experience aside because there was nothing that I knew that could explain what I'd been experiencing. Until I went to Manchester University and started talking to some folks there and got a little bit of information. And then again, it wasn't until really when I came into the parapsychological world and started hearing about abductions. And again, I kind of poo-pooed it and I went, yeah, right.
Yeah.
I don't think that's what happened to me. But then I was with at one of the conferences of the Society for Scientific Exploration, and up in New York State. We had one of our meetings up there while I was working up there. And one of the researchers was showing slides of abductions, and I panicked. I had this panicky feeling inside me. I wanted to run out of the room.
Wow.
But I stayed there because I thought, this is going to be weird if I suddenly run out of the room. But I was sweating, I was breathing heavy, I was feeling panicky, and I'm not a panicky person. People they nickname me Mary Poppins. And after that, it was like, I better look into this because there's something here that I'm not acknowledging. I don't want to acknowledge it, but I need to start doing some research.
And amongst things, and especially amongst your research, did you find any connection possibly between that event and your out-of-body experiences? Do you think that those were connected in any way, or that maybe one was conduit for the other?
It's a possibility because there's evidence that people who have abduction experiences, and I don't like that term so much because it's not necessarily being taken.
Yeah.
But anyway, that's what we're going to call it. And people come back from that, and very often a dormant intuitive ability is awakened. So that may have happened to me very, very early on, that this ability was awakened in me, perhaps as a small child.
Yeah. Yeah. And that is, I speak to a lot of people from the MUFON experience or resource team. And yes, this, I guess your case would not have necessarily been considered an abduction, more of a visitation and encounter than a true abduction, so to speak, or being taken into a craft or off planet. But at the same token, they do seemingly bestow something upon those that they visit. It's really interesting to see how people come back changed in different ways, not only ecstatically in what they believe and how they believe, because, well, everything to believe has just been radically changed and challenged, typically.
Yeah, and I think it's like a survival mode, that people perhaps become hyper alert or hyper vigilant because of the experience.
Yeah.
And that awakens this dormant, intuitive connection.
Well,
Yeah.
And it could very well, sadly and horribly also, Angela, be the fact that, yes, that traumatic shock to the system may be part of what's necessary for some people to awaken that dormant part.
Possibly. Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Now, with that in mind, have you ever gone back and viewed that experience to garner any more from it? Have you ever gone back and tried to view any of your out-of-body experiences that you had in the past?
I've really just written about them rather than, I did try to analyze them later in the book, and try to put them into categories to make some sense of them. And I came up with abduction 1 and abduction 2.
Okay.
So abduction 1 is these unknown energies, persons, entities, craft, and there are certain criteria that happen. They're non-human-like surgical, non-human location, non-Earth location, etc. Then there's abduction 2, whereas I believe that the authorities, let's just put that in a vague category there, want to know what's happening during these abductions and set up their own scenarios to gain information. And those contain very Earth-like human type situations, locations, events, artifacts, etc.
In your first experience, what technology do you remember, Angela?
The first one with my brother, when we saw the light, there was none, but I did go back and try to look at what had happened. And there was a perception of some, what I called golden beings coming into the house and just talking with us. But there wasn't any of the scenario where, people report being taken to a table and examined. But I had a lot of that, and I write about it. There are just too many to relate here, but they are in the book.
Wow. And had your brother had any experiences like that as well?
He's reluctant to talk about it, but he had seen lots of UFOs, particularly in the south of England.
Interesting. Yeah, and that is often the case, Angela, that people do not want to talk about it. They frequently come forth almost deathbed confession style. And even amongst families, even amongst friends, like Terry Lovelace, who we've had on the show numerous times. He rode as an EMT in the military for almost 20 years with somebody. They had a shared experience, never talked about it, and it drove them apart.
Yeah. Well, there's a taboo against talking about these things.
Yeah. And with that in mind, what about your remote viewing work? Do you find any taboos or reticence to your research when it comes to that?
Depends who you're talking to. As I mentioned, here in my little community, people know me as a writer. They know me as this nice lady who lives on the corner and waves and says hello. And she was the director of the senior center for a couple of years here in Boulder City. And but they don't know, unless they actually come across, Diary of an Abduction or Voices from the Cosmos, what I do. Some of them are very, very supportive and very interested. Others say, I know that about you, but I don't want to talk about it. So I respect that.
Yeah, because even having the conversation for some people, it can be a world shaker. Especially.
It can be very scary for some people because they've maybe heard about it and they go, I just don't want to discuss it.
Yeah. And with that in mind, going into your work in remote viewing, what are some of the more interesting things that you have run across? What's I guess probably the most frightening experience you've had as far as remote viewing goes? Because that's always one of my favorite things with Lynn Buchanan, is he's like, so you think you want to help find missing kids. Wait till the things start renting the spare space in your mind and the things you start seeing because that's what you want to do, So what are some of the things that have stuck with you, good and bad, as far as your experiences with remote viewing in the sessions you've had?
I think the very first remote viewing session that I did was for Ed Dane's group.
Okay.
Back 1990-ish. And just a coordinate. But what I perceived was what I started, and I did this with extended remote viewing, which was the natural, spontaneous remote viewing. And so I was laid on my bed, and what I do, I have a good memory. So I usually say, remember this. And what I perceived was this man in an aircraft in a brown wool uniform with those wire-rimmed glasses. And I saw the plane. It was having problems breathing, and then there was problems with the plane, and it crashed. And I watched him come up out of the water. He managed to get ashore and was walking up the shore, had this brown wool uniform that was really drenched, soaked with water. And he went down on his knees, and he knew that he wasn't going to see his family again, his wife and children. And it was incredibly sad. And then he collapsed, and I knew that he died. But I looked around because I knew logically I was supposed to be looking for data. So I looked and saw the village and an estuary, the ocean, the white cliffs, the vegetation. So I was doing quick looks, and went back and looked again at the sky, and he had definitely died. And I had been lying on my bed in Princeton doing this. At the point that I acknowledged he was dead, my cat leapt off of the bed because she was sitting with me while I was doing this session. A plant that was suspended above my desk at the side of the bed swung, and pens and pencils rolled off the desk.
Oh, wow.
Just fascinating. And I sat up and went, wow. And then quickly wrote everything down, sent it off to Ed Dames. Didn't say too much about the after effects, with the cat and everything. Tried to keep it as professional as possible. And then he gave me feedback on it that this was Antoine de Saint-Exupéry, I'm not quite sure how you pronounce it, who wrote The Little Prince.
Oh, wow.
Who was an army pilot. He was a dispatch pilot. He would take orders around the country, and it was the end of the Second World War. He'd crashed a couple of planes before that, but had come out of it okay. But this was his last flight.
Oh, wow.
And turned out to be his last flight before he was going back into civilian life. So the plane came down in the ocean off the south coast of France, right where I'd seen it, with these big white cliffs and the estuary with the village and everything else.
Remarkable. And once again, when you get hits like that, when you get those things that are just so entirely powerful and stick with you, I imagine that there are quite a few of those in your career.
There are many. Yeah, we looked for Amelia Earhart and her co-pilot, and looked for a DJ who in California that had gone missing. Found him. He'd been taken out to sea and shot and body dumped in the ocean.
Oh man.
Yeah, so that was recently. If you go to the History Channel and Mysteries of the Mind,
Okay.
there's a session there where I talk about it on camera, and they actually got the police detectives who were working on the case, who acknowledged the remote viewing information that we got.
Wow.
Because I was working with a group at that time.
Wow, incredible.
On camera. That was amazing.
And that's one of the things, like we're interviewing Pam Coronado coming up. She does quite a bit of work when it comes to finding bodies. And it's interesting to me how, and a lot of the reason why the data is kept the way it's kept is because people have different specialties. Mm-hmm. There are some people who are better at reading things that are on water or in water or around water. There are some people who can't read water for a lick.
Right. Yeah. And it's very individual.
Yeah. It's truly, truly remarkable. Now, in your book, Tactical Remote Viewing, there is one case that I think my audience would probably get on me if they went through and read the book and were like, why did Chris not ask her about this? The Sphinx. Viewing the Sphinx. What was your charge for that? You know, I guess what was your coordinate call for that? And what was the reasoning for it?
Yeah, because I was working for my 9-year business client at that time. He started off very skeptically, 2003, just giving me a couple of projects. And then we worked together for 9 years, helped him sell his business during the recession. He was very appreciative of the information I would get for him. But with the Sphinx, we often remote viewed some of his personal interests. And the Sphinx was one of his interests. And what he wanted to know was, were there other Sphinxes or are there other Sphinxes? So what I did was I went back to the early days of Egyptian history in doing a remote viewing, went way back and found that many people, they have these, what they call kopjes, I'm not sure how it's pronounced, outcroppings of rock in the desert. And lions and other creatures like to sit up on top of these because it gives them vantage points. So what I saw was that people were very afraid of these lions upon the kopjes and venerated them and deified them, made them into basically gods because they were so powerful. And then they started building artificial kopjes for the lions. And then, of course, sphinxes, which were depictions of lions. And they are, what I perceived was that they are all over the place, but many of them are buried by natural desert or other, water floods. And they will be discovered over time.
And that is one of the interesting situations of remote viewing, is that you can travel to any place, anytime. It's not restricted by those bounds like our literal imagination is. The one thing I keep resoundingly saying on the show when it comes to remote viewing and many other things in the same realm is quantum entanglement just won the Nobel Prize last year. Like that is full on exactly what this is just about. The idea that two things, despite distance, despite time, can influence each other.
Yeah. And future viewing too is possible, but you have to wait for feedback. For example, in 1994, I was asked to remote view the rings of Saturn. and very little was known about them apart from the telescopic viewings that they had done. And so I did the viewing. There were several questions. This was front loaded with questions like, what are the rings made of? Why are the rings? What's in the rings? Why? When did it begin? So exploratory. This was an exploratory remote viewing. And I had to wait till, I think it was 2011, when the Cassini probe approached the rings and started sending back data. And then I was able to grab that data and say, hey, I saw that. And you get some feedback that way.
And was it a client or someone like that tasked you with viewing the rings of Saturn?
It was a group. It was a cutoff group with Ed Dames and a few others who had originally been in Ed Dames's Psi group. That was the break off from the military group.
Okay.
When he went civilian.
Yep.
Then he set up a group and then broke off from that into another group. So it was, Ed wasn't part of that group at the time, but there were people who'd worked with Ed who formed this breakaway group. So I was working for them.
Okay.
And they were in California.
And now you work for yourself. You actually have your own group of people and do your own courses, your own classes, all kinds of things with MindWise Consulting. We've got you for about another 10, 15 minutes. Let's get into that and how you go about using remote viewing as a consulting service.
Yeah, it's since COVID, things have dropped off a bit. But it's gradually picking up again. And now I have, recently I've had a couple of business people contact me, particularly one entrepreneur, and in the technology world. Just leave it there. And it's not anybody in the news. It's nobody well known. And he had no idea about remote viewing. He had seen me interviewed on one of Jeffrey Mishlov's podcasts.
Sure.
The visual, yeah. And so he wanted to approach me and see if I could do remote viewing for him. And he gave me, I told him, he knew nothing about remote viewing and how to task it, how to get together a coordinate, etc., and how about the protocols. So I had to educate him first and how to do a tasking, to write down a task, a blind tasking that the viewer doesn't get to see, but is basically what the viewer wants to look for, the client wants to look for. And I'll give you one very brief one. He gave me a coordinate, which is a random series of letters and numbers, not necessarily geographic coordinates. Yeah. And the front loading of isolated location. And that's all he gave me. And what I did when I started doing the session, I was doing it with spontaneous remote viewing. I found myself in a very dark, cold, black, white, and gray environment outdoors in like a caldera of an extinct volcano with mountains around me and very, very isolated. So I drew and described that on paper because you have to have a written and drawn record with remote viewing. And then I thought, I'm going to go look, I'm going up and over, I'm going to look over the mountains there. And I saw runways and I thought, maybe this is Area 51, mental noise coming in. And then I got, you are not allowed here, go away. So I just left.
Wow.
And it turns out that I was viewing Antarctica and a specific location that's of great interest to some folks these days in Antarctica. And other viewers have gone there and been told, you're not allowed here. You go away, stay away.
That is interesting and remarkable, because yes, there is quite the interest internationally in Antarctica, and there is a no-fly zone, and there's been all kinds of weird things around this one area, and to know that you got the very definite message of go away.
Yeah, you're not allowed here.
Do you think that? And this is a question just real quick in the last few minutes. Is it the fact that another viewer can stop a viewer?
I don't know. I've never had that experience.
Okay.
But I have heard that there are some viewers set up protections. I set up protections around myself, but I've never had another viewer prevent me from viewing.
And that was going to be my follow-up question, is it because, there's always the folks out there, Angela, and I will pray daily for those that have the knee-jerk reaction of this is of the devil.
Right.
This is something that every single mind possesses. Some can be better trained, some cannot be. No different than every mind has the ability to know how to walk.
Mm-hmm.
Like biologically, we all have that knowing and yearning. And
it's very ancient. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, I was going to ask, do you set up protections before you start a session? Do you personally do anything?
Only
you
if
recommend viewers do something?
Yeah, only if I perceive that there might be some danger. But I don't normally do that because I want to have access to as much information as possible. And if I set up too many protections around myself, I may miss something. So it's only if I perceive that there might be something, for example, people saying, oh, this is of the devil. They work. I say it's not. It's Ecclesiastes 12, the gifts of the Spirit. Everything I do is covered biblically.
I would tend to agree. As a former seminarian, 110%.
Okay. I have answers for the skeptics, for the church, the scientists, and regular folk.
Well, I just did a whole episode about prophecy and the idea of, it's not a prophecy if there's not a warning. If there's not a way out, it's not a prophecy. So this always provides a way out. There's always some kind of answer, some kind of data that you can glean from a remote viewing session.
Yes, I agree. Yeah, but even though when you think it's a complete mess, there's always something that can be useful. Yeah.
And once again, that's where good monitors come down to. That's where having good people that know more about the target, know anything about the target, because you know nothing about it.
Right.
You're going in blind with nothing but maybe an action of some sort to look for and a random set of numbers. So it's remarkable the data that is gleaned from sessions like this. Everything from major business decisions to people finding, I guess, not necessarily space junk, but valuables in space on asteroids. There have been remote viewers used to find possible landing spots of interest on Mars and the moon for upcoming missions. It's pretty wild.
And there are more uses of it. I feel that as more and more people get trained, there are more applications that can be put in place. Yeah,
100%. And it's one of those much like the MUFON archives. I cannot wait until AI is turned loose on the field of data from remote viewing. To start being able to find similarities in viewers, similarities in viewing styles. There is so much data that can be garnered there that it's just a matter of a metric amount of data and a metric amount of people to go through it, with purpose. And that is the beauty of things like AI, is that's exactly what it's built to do, is ingest things and search through it with a designated
data
purpose. So, once again, this is just to echo the beginning of the conversation. This is one of the only parapsychological fields out there, folks, that is lab proven. Reams of data. Like, you could fill rooms with the amount of data that there is on remote viewing. I want to thank you for your time, for coming on, for all of your diligent work in the field over the last many years, Angela. Thank you so much for helping keep this field alive and helping pass it forward and teach it to the next generation. Before we let you go, let everybody know where they can go to follow you, where they can go to find you on social media, where they can go to register for classes, and where they can go to buy your books and lessons and everything else.
All of my books are on Amazon under Angela Thompson Smith, author. There are a couple that are out of print that I'm going to be working on in the next couple of years, health willing. I'm at Angela Thompson Smith. Mindwise Consulting at gmail.com. And then Mindwise Consulting is my website. You can also, I'm currently doing classes until June with Irva Ed. So you go to irva.org and then to Irva Ed, and you'll see the classes there. And you can still sign up for the remaining individual classes till the end of this semester. And then I will be putting out some flyers, etc., online, probably on my website. And then also I have a personal page, Angela Thompson Smith. You can ask to be a friend and I'll take a look and see, and you might be lucky and get in. But definitely the website, and my email address is mindwiseconsulting@gmail.com.
Fantastic. Well, I can honestly say I am one of the few to get to call you digital friend.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
So, I consider myself very fortunate, and even you taking the time for the interview. Once again, thank you. I know your schedule is more than stacked, and you are always busy out there teaching and passing things on and bringing up the next generation of viewers. Like I said before our interview, when I am done with my classes with Lynn, I need to sign up for yours next. Because
yes, I love that.
It really is, even if you're a viewer out there, folks, and you may have become stagnant in what you do, things like that, remember that it is very much, like Lynn says, a mental martial art. Look for another dojo, look for another teacher. You would be surprised what somebody else's point of view on what you're doing does to reinvigorate you and move you forward and open up new things. So, please do hold the line real quick, Angela, while we close things out with the audience. Thank you once again for your time. And
you're welcome.
Thank you for all your great work in the field. While you are online checking out all of the amazing work of Dr. Angela Thompson Smith at Mindwise Consulting, everybody, make sure to stop on by Curious Realm. CuriousRealm.com is where you can find all the episodes. That's where you can like, follow, subscribe, share, comment. That's where you can find the YouTube channels of all of our guests. If you go to CuriousRealm.com/videos, you will see all of our videos as well as videos. All of our guest channels are there. So stop on by, subscribe, like their stuff as well. You can also stop by CuriousRealm.com/store. That's where you can go to buy all of the videos from our guests, all of the books, all of the classes, all of the music, All that kind of good stuff is available at curiousrealm.com/store. And of course, if you are a Roku user, make sure to download the all-new Curious Realm Roku app that has tons of binaural beat and meditation music on there, made by yours truly. So that is a free app. Stop on by, download it. You will have access to not only all of our episodes and content, but also to all of the fantastic binaural beat music. Thank you so much, as always, everybody, for tuning in. Thank you, as always, for your open hearts, your open minds. Without those, a conversation can't be had. And without a conversation, humanity does not march forward. So remember, take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and stay curious. We'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you for tuning into this episode of The Curious Realm. Stay tuned for more guests, forbidden topics, and hidden truths. Follow us on social media by searching Curious Realm. To download the official Curious Realm app and view the Knowledge Vault, or become a sponsor of Curious Realm, visit our website at curiousrealm.com. Curious Realm is available on your favorite podcast and video services, as well as KPNL Radio, APRTV, and the Curious Realm app for Roku devices. Curious Realm is a proud member of the Ground Zero Media and Aftermath Media family of podcasts. For more great shows and members-only content, visit groundzeromedia.org and aftermathmedia.com today. Thanks for listening. Stay curious, and remember, the other side is always watching.